Have you ever noticed that people seem to listen to you less? That your children interrupt, your grandchildren brush you off, and conversations end sooner than they used to? That can be painful, especially when all you're trying to do is share care, wisdom, and love. But the truth is, sometimes, without realizing it, we teach our loved ones to stop listening. This isn't a criticism. It's an invitation to look a little deeper, with respect for yourself and for the people you care about. Today we're going to talk about 5 common habits that can quietly damage communication, and more importantly, how to gently change them. No blame, no shame. Just simple things you can do to restore connection and mutual respect. Let's start with something I've seen come up a lot. Not because someone means harm, but because they care deeply. And that's repeating the same message or concern over and over again. With age, it's natural to feel more protective of your family, or more anxious that something important might be overlooked. Maybe you want to remind your grandson to dress warmly, or your daughter to check her blood pressure, or simply repeat a piece of advice you believe in. But here's the thing. When repetition becomes a habit, especially when it happens several times in one conversation, it can push others away, not bring them closer. Instead of hearing love or wisdom, the listener starts hearing doubt, like you don't trust that they heard you the first time, or worse, that you don't trust them at all. And for younger people especially, that can feel more like criticism than care, even when that's not what you mean. I remember working with Ron, a 73-year-old grandfather from a small town in Kentucky. He's a kind, responsible man who always prided himself on being involved in his family's life. But lately, he'd been telling me how his teenage grandkids barely looked up from their phones when he spoke. He felt invisible, like what he said didn't matter anymore. We sat down and looked at how his conversations usually went. Turns out, every time they visited, Ron would repeat the same reminders. Are you eating enough vegetables? Don't. Forget your coat. You need to take school seriously. And even though these things were said with good intentions, his grandkids started tuning out. I asked Ron to try something different. Next time, he felt the urge to repeat himself. I suggested he say, I know I've mentioned this before, and it's only because I care. That little shift opened the door for real connection. After a few weeks, he noticed that when he spoke less often and with more intention, they listened more. One of his granddaughters even started asking him questions, which hadn't happened in a long time. What often helps is this. Once you've said something, trust that it was heard. And if you feel it's important enough to say again, introduce it gently. Say something like, I might be repeating myself, but this matters to me. Or, you probably remember this, but I just want to make sure. That tone tells the other person that you respect their attention and intelligence, and it builds trust instead of resistance. It also helps to pause before speaking. Ask yourself, is this about them, or is this about my own worry? That pause can make all the difference. Your voice absolutely matters, but so does the space between your words. Sometimes the silence, the waiting, the simple presence, those are the things that make people feel truly seen and heard. You don't need to say it 5 times to show you care. Say it once with love and trust that it's enough. Because it is. Here's another pattern I often see, and again, it usually comes from a good place, from wanting to protect or guide the people you love. But it can quietly push them away, and that's turning every conversation into either advice or correction. As we get older, we often have more life experience, more clarity, and yes, sometimes more concern, especially when we see loved ones making choices we wouldn't make ourselves. The temptation to correct or guide them can be strong, but if every conversation turns into a lesson or a suggestion or a you should, it creates a wall instead of a bridge. The other person starts feeling like they're being evaluated instead of being listened to, and after a while, they stop coming to talk altogether. Not because they don't love you, but because they want to feel seen, not managed. I worked with Helen, 76, from Wisconsin, who told me her adult children had stopped calling as often. At first, she thought they were just busy, but then her daughter finally said during a visit, "Mom, every time we talk, I feel like I'm being scolded." That was hard for Helen to hear, because in her mind, she was offering love. Helpful tips, as she put it. But when we looked at how conversations usually went, we noticed a pattern. Her son would mention a new project at work, and she'd immediately respond with how he should do it better. Her daughter would talk about the kids, and Helen would jump in with what they were doing wrong. It wasn't intentional, but it came across as constant correction. So we tried something new. Instead of responding with advice, I asked her to start by saying, "That sounds like a lot," or "Tell me more about that," and then just listen. A few weeks later, she told me the change was unbelievable. Her daughter called twice in 1 week just to talk. Her son sent her a photo from his job site and said, "Thought you'd like to see this." That openness had returned, not because Helen stopped caring, but because she started showing it differently. One of the simplest ways to connect better is to practice just being with someone instead of trying to fix them. When someone shares something with you, pause before giving advice. Ask yourself, do they want help or do they just want me to hear them? If you're not sure, you can simply ask, "Do you want my thoughts, or do you just need someone to listen?" That one question alone can transform a relationship. People don't always need your answers. Sometimes they just need your presence. Your wisdom matters, but you don't have to share it all at once, and you don't have to turn every moment into a lesson. Think of it like sunlight. When it's gentle and warm, people lean into it. When it's too direct, they shield their eyes. You're the same light either way. The impact just depends on the way it's shared. You don't need to fix every problem to be valued. Being present, truly present, is already enough. Let's talk about something I hear all the time, usually, said with a mix of pride and frustration. And that's the phrase, "back in my day." I understand where it comes from. You've lived through so much, seen things change, overcome hardships most younger people today can't even imagine. And sometimes when you look at how things are done today, it's hard not to compare. But here's what I've learned. Even when you're right, even when what you say makes perfect sense, constant comparisons between generations tend to shut down conversation instead of opening it up. Younger people often hear it as judgment, not wisdom. They stop listening because they feel like no matter what they do, it won't be good enough compared to how it was back then. The problem isn't your experience, it's how it's framed. I remember a client named Edward, 79, from Texas. He was a proud father and grandfather, grew up on a farm, served in the Navy, built his house with his own hands, and raised 3 kids through tough times. But now, his teenage grandchildren didn't seem interested in what he had to say. He told me, "They don't care about anything but their phones." We looked deeper into how he talked to them. Turns out, nearly every story he told started with "when I was your age," followed by how things were harder, how he didn't complain, how he just worked through it. His intentions were good. He wanted to show them resilience, values, perspective. But what they heard was criticism, that their struggles weren't valid, that their world was easier and therefore less meaningful. I asked him to try something new. Instead of comparing his past to their present, start with a question about their world, then share a story, not to correct, but to connect. A month later, he told me his grandson started asking him about the Navy. It wasn't the story that changed, it was the tone. What often helps is this. Instead of using your experience as a measuring stick, use it as a bridge. Say something like, "That reminds me of something I went through," or "I don't know what that's like, but here's what helped me once." This opens the door to conversation instead of closing it. And if you do feel the urge to say, "in my day," pause and ask yourself, is this about proving a point or about making a connection? Because your story has power. but how you tell it determines how it's received. You've lived a life full of lessons. You've earned every scar and every story. But your wisdom doesn't need to compete to matter. It already matters because it's yours. Think of your experience like a book someone else hasn't read yet. If you let them open the pages instead of reading it out loud over their shoulder, they'll want to know more. You don't have to remind them how different things were. Just show them how you stayed strong and let them see how you're still here, still learning, still listening. Here's something I say gently but often. If every conversation you have with someone starts with a complaint, it becomes harder for that person to keep coming back. And I say this with compassion, because I know that when we're in pain, when we feel isolated or disappointed, those feelings need to come out somehow. But if every phone call or visit begins with what hurts or what's wrong, the other person, especially if they're younger, can start to feel overwhelmed or helpless. Over time, they might call less often, stay for shorter visits, or keep the conversation surface level, not because they don't love you, but because they don't know what to say anymore. They start to associate the interaction with heaviness. The truth is, what we lead with sets the tone, and if we lead with warmth or curiosity, even if we're going through something hard, we leave more room for connection instead of distance. Remember Marcia, a woman I worked with in her early 70s who lived in Florida. She was bright, thoughtful, and sharp, but she had gone through a few difficult years, health challenges, the loss of a close friend, and some tension with her daughter. By the time she came to me, she felt like her grandkids didn't want to talk to her anymore. They used to call every week, she said, and now I feel like I'm bothering them. When I asked her what those calls usually sounded like, she paused and then admitted that most of them started with, "Well, I'm still alive, barely," or "another bad night with my back." She said it with a smile, but after a while, she realized that she had unintentionally built a pattern of leading with negativity. So we made a small change, not ignoring the hard things, but shifting the focus. She started her next call by asking her grandson about his music class. She told her granddaughter she'd been reading about a new space telescope and asked what she thought about space. Within a month, her calls started lasting longer again. Her grandson even sent her a photo from his school concert. She said, "It's not that I'm pretending everything's fine. It's just that now I let joy into the room first." What often helps is keeping a little list of things you enjoy talking about: current events, music, memories, hobbies, or just asking questions. That way, when the conversation starts, you have something light to lead with before anything heavy comes in. You can still be honest about what's difficult, but after you've made the other person feel welcome. It's like opening the door with a smile before mentioning the rain outside. You don't have to be cheerful all the time, but people are drawn to the parts of you that feel alive, not just the parts that hurt. You are more than your aches and your grief. You're a whole story with funny thoughts and deep questions and beautiful memories. That's what your loved ones want to hear, and that's the version of you they'll keep coming back to. Let's wrap up with a habit that's incredibly common and often unintentional, coming across as if you always know better. I've met many older adults who say, "I don't mean to sound bossy, I've just seen more." And they're right. They have seen more, lived through more, and figured out things younger folks are still learning. But the tricky part is this: when advice always comes from a place of authority, when it feels like, "Here's how you should do it," it doesn't feel like wisdom, it feels like control. And nobody likes to feel controlled, especially adults who are trying to make their own choices. When someone feels like they're being talked down to, even if your advice is helpful, they stop listening, not because what you're saying isn't valuable, but because they don't feel respected in the conversation. I remember Tom, a retired contractor from Pennsylvania, 75 years old, with 3 grown kids and 5 grandkids. He came to me saying he felt left out. "Nobody asks my opinion anymore," he told me. He was used to running job sites, making decisions, solving problems. But now, When he gave suggestions to his family about their careers, their parenting, even their driving, they would either shut down or change the subject. At first, he thought they were just being sensitive, but when we looked at the way he spoke, it was always direct. What you should do is, or that's not going to work. He didn't realize it, but he was delivering advice like orders. I asked him to try an experiment. The next time he wanted to give advice, start with a question. What made you decide that? Or, can I share what worked for me once? A few weeks later, he came back and said, "It's like I'm part of the conversation again. They're opening up." Nothing about his knowledge changed, just the way he entered the room with it. What often helps is shifting from instruction to curiosity. Instead of giving advice right away, ask questions. Let the other person feel seen and heard first. Then, if it feels right, offer your story, not your verdict. Say something like, "Would it help if I shared how I handled something similar?" That one sentence changes everything. It invites instead of commands, and people listen differently when they feel respected. You still get to share what you know. You're just offering it as a gift, not a rule book. Your wisdom is like light, but not every light is the same. Some lights burn too hot and make people look away. Others give off warmth that people gather around. You don't have to dim yourself. Just choose to shine in a way that invites others closer. You don't need to prove your right to be respected. The way you listen can be just as powerful as what you say, and the more you listen, the more people will want to hear you. If you recognized yourself in any of these points, don't take it as a reason for self-criticism. Take it as a sign that you're ready to build bridges, not walls. Tell us in the comments, which part felt personal to you? Maybe you've already started making changes and want to share your experience. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Here, we talk with you, not about you. You are not a burden. You are a source. Your strength isn't in always being right. It's in staying real. And people always hear what's real. You are not alone. You matter, and your voice still carries. Let's make sure it's heard.